Very often, the principal difference between a failed cultural movement and a successful one is whether or not it spoke to the concerns of the common populace. This is the reason why I often like to have a look at the more normie sphere of things in entertainment and politics to determine where we are vis-a-vis the normie populace. And that is why I want to show you a video today from a YouTube channel called Legendary Drops. Now, this is a fairly non-political person, a normie with a largely normie audience who doesn't have too much of a understanding of the finer points of the political, the moral, and the ethical sides of our ongoing culture war. However, he produced a video, It Is Not For You, named You Aren't the Audience Anymore, that I think is a wonderful look into the normie position and the mindset as it exists in 2026. Now, I warn you, this is going to be a bit of a repetition of a lot of things we've talked about previously, of course, but I think it is very valuable to see where the normies are today. So, without too much further ado, let's get into it, shall we?
I've been getting called everything under the sun lately. I think I'm probably just going to take a break from Twitter because, well, my opinions come out far better in a YouTube video anyway. How many times have you guys looked at a game and said, who is this being made for? How many times have you guys thought that exact same thing about a long-running franchise or a series that you've supported for years?
And there's one of the key points that we're going to be talking about today. What is happening to franchises that seemingly don't have a target audience anymore? Now, we've seen this phenomenon begin creeping in well over 10 years ago now, and it genuinely did begin with the idea of broadening the audience that played video games. Now, this was even before like the 2014s. This was an idea from back in the very early 2000s, where video game developers were looking at their franchises and thinking, well, can't we sell this to other people than gamers? How can we make our games more accessible? And back then, that didn't mean diverse yet. It meant things like lowering the difficulty cap, for example, or lowering prerequisites for hardware, or simply including better tutorials. Paradox Interactive has struggled with this question for a decade plus now, trying to figure out how to make a general public-friendly grand strategy game, and have even made some decent steps in that direction, even whilst they make 2 steps backwards with things like the automated general systems. But the current day question, however, is rather different, as we are no longer trying to genuinely broaden the audience to more people who will play video games. We're instead turning it into a moral and ethical dilemma, but we'll continue on about that.
One of the most wildest trends that I've seen in the games industry is the emergence of these games that seem to have just no target audience whatsoever. Whether it's the themes, whether it's the genre, whether it's the characters, doesn't really matter. You can just instantly look at it and know nobody is going to show up for this. Hell, they're probably not even going to hear about it.
And there, of course, is the big difference. So, there is indeed a target audience for these video games. It is, however, as the video itself explains, not us. This is the target audience for a lot of modern video games, especially those within the AAA sphere. And it is targeting these groups not because they buy video games, not because they are a large and eager audience ready and willing to embrace gaming or entertainment in general. We know this for a fact now, as basically every single title that have targeted this progressive demographic has failed miserably, to the point where a game that is specifically made for them is usually struggling to reach 200 to 300 people on Steam concurrent, whereas a game that cannibalizes an already established franchise will usually bury that franchise within 1 or 2 entries. So it's not that they don't have a target audience, it is simply that they are no longer attempting to sell video games. They are trying to push an ideology and a moral agenda.
Along with that, we have long-running franchises that have been pivoting so hard. These guys have been snapping their own ankles. They have been changing their games, changing their audiences, changing just about everything they can, trying to broaden their audience as much as possible while just losing all those people just the same. Recently, we just saw PlayStation announce God of War Laufey, a spin-off title starring Faye instead of Kratos, and people are mad. I haven't seen gamers going at each other's throats like this in a long time. It's like Bloodsport. I've actually been kind of enjoying it, but...
And that's an interesting thing too, because the debate seems to have been very, very one-sided, in fact. I would argue indeed that what has kind of defined the God of War Laufey argument is how the opposition haven't really managed to counter and mount a counter argument. It has all simply been reduced yet again to pure ad hominems that people hate women, etc., which was a notion blown out of the water mere days later with the announcement of the Stellar Blade sequel. It has been one of the weakest counteroffensives I've ever seen from the progressive audience. They simply no longer have a position to take here that isn't simply an ad hominem attack upon the audience that already exists for these games.
Much of it has been this intentional, dishonest reframing and gaslighting, trying to make this an issue over gender rather than anything else. Like, people actually have a problem with female protagonists in video games. No, this is a matter of taste. This is a matter of expectations. It's a matter of people feeling like they're being pushed out.
And there's the important normie position. So they do also recognize what is going on here, even if they haven't been able to quite figure out why. They know why this is happening, and they know that the defense of why it is happening is clearly dishonest. They are being lied to, and the normies have begun to notice.
So today I want to talk about that. I want to talk about all the drama that's been going on with God of War Laufey, people's reaction to it as well as mine. I want to talk about a game that lived, died, and was buried before you even knew about it, and how so often people want you to just ignore the elephant in the room. Or they call you a misogynist. Sorry, your insults don't work here.
Now remember that, by the way, because we'll be returning to that point later.
And then PlayStation revealed God of War Laufey, a spin-off title with Kratos' wife Faye, set in some kind of fever dream realm for the dead gods. Visually, I think the game looks really impressive. The combat is going to be a huge step up from 2018 in Ragnarok. Apparently, Kratos gave Faye all of his air combos instead of a wedding ring when they got married, but, you know, as I watched, I just felt nothing. The tone just felt so painfully millennial. There's a talking cube named Frank and a sword named Rue, and there's this constant ironic dialogue and the same pink and purple aesthetic that we have seen in countless generic games over the past couple of years, and I just sat there thinking, who is this for?
Who is this for? Oh, again, we know the audience. And as for the tone, yes. This is also something that has been more and more beginning to filter down into the common view of things, right? The fact that we can't write anything serious anymore. No setting can take itself seriously anymore. A recent beautiful example of that, of course, would be the recently released He-Man and Masters of the Universe movie. A movie that, in my opinion, could have been absolutely fantastic, frankly, had it simply been willing to, for even a second, take itself seriously. It is, like, the modern audience is not so TikTok-brained, I firmly do believe still, that they cannot sit through 10-20 minutes of a serious story without somebody cracking a joke at the main character's expense, which was precisely Master of the Universe's problem. When it takes itself seriously, during the death of Adam's father, for example, or when He-Man first gets his powers, it is excellent, genuinely fantastic. When it has a moment to talk about masculinity, its meanings, its intent, and its virtues, it is a fantastic movie, but it is near universally then swiftly ruined by some snide remark from one of the side characters.
And with Faye as the main character, even in a spin-off, guys, I'm just going to say it, I play God of War for Kratos. I have played these games for 20 years because of the unbridled masculine energy, the visceral rage, the brutal combat, the stoicism, and then later on, the way that they handled loss, fatherhood, and grappling with your past from a male perspective. It felt like this series grew up with me, so playing a quirked up version of that same universe as Faye just doesn't really do it for me. And yes, I can see the narrative value. Faye's death in God of War 2018 left a lot of questions, but I'd always assumed that those questions, well, Kratos, he would just uncover them himself.
And this really is the reason why I'm kind of surprised it's taken them this long to get to the God of War franchise, because as I mentioned during the Human Mass of the Universe review, we don't have much in the way of masculine stories anymore. They have largely fallen by the wayside and been replaced by a lot less masculine stories, to the point where men are desperate for role models and for figures to base their own worldview upon, for leading roles. And Kratos then has apparently become one of these figures for an entire generation of console gamers. The reason why then we need to replace him with a woman, and will eventually need to push that into the wider video game, as I guarantee you, the full-on tonal shift is not going to end with this game. The argument that this is merely a spin-off does not hold water, because we have never, not even singularly once, seen a video game head in the feminine direction and then turn around and head back towards masculinity again, ever. Once this tonal shift is in, once the talking cubes and the talking swords and the $100,000 an hour actors and PVC squares have been normalized, that is God of War from there on. And the rot already began in the game when they decided to race swap Norse gods. That was them tipping their first toes in the water and seeing, will they accept this? They did? Very well then, let's go a little bit further. And Laufey is the result of that.
Simply feeling like their expectations had been betrayed. Spin-off or not, they come to God of War expecting Kratos, and that's not what they got, not even close. I mean, even David Jaffe, the creator of God of War, came out and said that it just didn't make any sense to him. He went out of his way to make sure that he has no issue with a female lead. That's not what he's trying to say, but he argued that this is just not what people come to God of War for.
And there's another very important thing. So, here's kind of the general position of the normies right now. They can recognize that something is wrong, like David Jaffe, the creator of God of War, for example. He can look at this and go, this isn't God of War. This is Quirt Chungus nonsense with a female lead. This isn't what I signed up for. What is this? But he will then immediately also go on Twitter and backpedal rapidly by pointing out this has nothing to do with any culture war nonsense. There is no external force affecting these changes. This happened through sheer coincidence, one must therefore assume, and that he remains the most progressive guy you know, and with absolutely no problems with a woman starring in a God of War game, and that is not the problem at all. In fact, having more women characters in games is wonderful. What's also going, they're too ugly. Okay, David, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this occurring? Why are the women deliberately uglified, and they are clearly and obviously being done so? Why do you, David, immediately look at this trailer and go, this is not God of War? It is because of the progressive politics you yourself are defending. And this is the catching stone for the normie audience right now. The fully non-politicized who have no idea what's going on audience. They have become able to identify the problem, and even they're starting to be able to see the larger pattern at play, but they are refusing to identify the actual issue at hand. They still do not know the political side of it, or they are simply refusing to recognize it, as that would cause all manners of, problems internally, as they'd need to start jumping through some hoop to explain why all of the female characters are ugly in 2026, when we have the technology to make these characters as attractive as we damn well want to. Why would we do this? Well, we know, and the reason is political. The reason is that wider audience that we have talked about. That is the reason, explicitly so, and we have been told it by the people making these games. And until the normies can finally take that last step and go, no, it is actually the female lead that is the problem, it is actually something inherently negative about taking a masculine franchise, taking the man out of it, and replacing him with a female. And the only reason you would do that is for external politics. Only when they arrive at that position can we finally hammer home the rest of the argument.
There's been a lot of back and forth as to why people have been reacting so strongly. Some people seem genuinely confused, but I think a lot of people are just acting. Instead of engaging with what players are actually saying, you're seeing people attack their masculinity, accuse them of being afraid to play as a woman, or they're just calling them a misogynist and moving on. I wasn't even going to make a video about this until I had seen just how often people were dishonestly reframing and reducing criticism, acting like players just have no reason whatsoever to be upset when we have watched some version of this happen across nearly every fucking major franchise. People are attached to Kratos. He has been the face of this series for 20 years. And who are we kidding here? God of War has always been a game that's been primarily made for dudes, from banging chicks for red orbs to slaughtering the Greek pantheon to raising your son by yourself and grappling with your past. This series has built its identity around Kratos and a distinctive male perspective.
Exactly. And again, this is what I'm saying. They can see the pattern now. They know what's going on. They just can't take, or aren't ready to take, the next step and answer why.
And look, man, I totally understand the argument that this is just a spin-off and that Kratos is confirmed to be coming back, and normally I would just shrug this off and move on. But the problem is that the players do not feel like the main thing is secure anymore. All likely due to some PTSD that's been brought on by pattern recognition. Across all of entertainment, we've been watching as male leads have been sidelined, aged out, humiliated, killed off, or replaced. So even when it's just one specific game that might feel harmless, it's landing inside of a much larger pattern. One that people have been pointing out for years, only to be told that they're just imagining what's happening right in front of them. No.
Again, the pattern. The question still remains, why? Why is this happening, and why is it happening so broadly? And I like the beginning defensiveness here as well, whereas I would normally just ignore this. This is totally harmless. However, look at the pattern. Yes, look at the pattern, and you will find the answers which you seek.
Nobody would care if this was isolated, but we've been watching as Ciri's taking over for Geralt in The Witcher 4, Kate replaced Marcus in Gears, it happened with Uncharted, Malinaway with Hades 2, Atsu replacing Jin in Ghost of Yotai. We regularly see male-led games move towards female protagonists, but we never see that door swing in the opposite direction. And I am saying this as somebody that likes most of these characters. And yes, some of the changes that we see absolutely make complete narrative sense. I defended The Witcher 4, and I went out of my way to even defend Ghost of Yotai because Jin's story was finished. This is not me saying that every single franchise must be led by the same man forever, or even only by men in some cases, but when you're seeing the same shift happen again and again, it becomes difficult not to notice. More of the gaming space is becoming feminine coded, and the audience that has historically supported these franchises is now being told that noticing that is just them being insecure or hateful. And that's where the backlash is coming from.
And I am awaiting that backlash to mount yet further, to the point where we no longer need to launch the defense of the backlash. I'm all for this, just it's happening a bit too fast, it's happening a bit too sudden, and a bit too broadly. No. We do not need the qualifier any longer. We do not need I'm all okay with this, I'm happy to have my stuff destroyed, just not quite as quickly and not quite as broadly. No, we must stand on the position of, I no longer want you to break my toys, I want to keep them for myself. You want to have your toys? Well, I want to have mine. Fuck off.
That doesn't happen because a woman can't lead in a brutal or serious game, or that they can't be aimed at male audiences. We already know that they can. Lara Croft, Bayonetta, Nier Automata, Stellar Blade, plenty of Final Fantasy games have made it work, and a lot of people are really looking forward to Tides of Annihilation. The difference is that those characters were written to belong as the lead in their worlds. The entire identity of the game doesn't need to bend around another character taking over. But when these modern studios inherit these male-led franchises, they seem completely incapable of doing that. Instead of placing a woman into a natural role, naturally existing there, they have to rebuild the tone around them in the safest, most corporate version of a female protagonist that they can possibly imagine. And I think that's what people see when they immediately look at Laufey. They're not just reacting to Faye as a character or Faye replacing Kratos, they are reacting to everything that comes with her. The quips, the talking cube, the talking sword, and the version of God of War that suddenly sounds and looks like a dozen other games that everybody has already ignored. Nobody is saying that women can't lead in games. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. I think that they should have their own games. It's probably not coming off the way that it probably should.
And I am saying they can't lead. Not in masculine titles. As yet again, we are making the defense here. I call you back to when he said at the beginning that your insults don't work here. They clearly do. The word misogynist still has a tremendous amount of power and authority within normie circles, which is why we have now spent several minutes equivocating, explaining that you're not against women, you're not against them, you don't hate them, they can lead in all kinds of games. It is in essence the attempt to outflank the left from the left. No. Women cannot lead in masculine franchises or masculine settings. If you are to have a female lead, you require an entire game world built around that. You need a thesis that protects them as the main character. In the question of like Bayonetta, for example, she has superpowers, or the equivalent thereof in any ways. In Stellar Blade, you have androids that are demonstrated to be incredibly capable fighters. And all of this is fine, because here's the thing, once you have created a setting, you can establish anything you want within that setting. You can have a world where women are objectively more powerful than men on every level due to mana or mutations or any number of things. And once that is established, gamers will simply accept it. That has been how gaming has been forever, but you cannot then violate the rules of that universe, which is what we're kind of seeing now in all of these franchises. As the reason why we are making female leads is not because it can work, it cannot in male established franchises, it is because the man itself is the problem. The masculine element is the problem, and what has to be removed for the broader audience to thrive. Or so is the theory. And by the way as well, this is not because it's corporate safe. It is the exact opposite. The corporations are not embracing this because it is not selling. In fact, practically the only corporations that have been able to make this work are things like Lego. The people who sell the already most haste product that exists solely based on the user's imagination can get away with it because nobody plays it beyond the simple fact that it represents a thing they like. People don't play with Legos because they're Legos, they play with Legos because it can represent either their imagination, or Star Wars, or Harry Potter, or even just simple bum sex, as represented by this. So let's not be so defensive anymore and simply say that no, women cannot lead in masculine franchises. They must be given their own exclusive titles to lead in, or it will not work. In the same way, incidentally, that you could not replace Bayonetta or Eve with a guy in the same world with the same moveset and the same style and have it make sense.
These publishers and studios are so confident in what they're doing and the changes that they're making and the characters that they're putting in. My question is, why is it so often that these characters have to inherit the names, the audiences, and the cultural weight of games that were built around men? Why don't we instead call out the blatant misogyny of the games industry and of creative industries as a whole, that they believe that women can't stand on their own and the only way that they can is if they stand on the shoulders of men to find success? Call me a misogynist? Try looking in the mirror.
Again, outflanking the left from the left. It won't work. They don't subscribe to their own morality. Their morality is not something that is principled or something that they abide by or a set of rules or anything like that. It is a weapon with which to beat you, and you exclusively. And the reason why they need to put them in these established franchises is because they cannot sell on their own. Every time we've tried to create, or they have tried to create a diverse franchise from the ground up, like 1348 Ex Voto, for example, it has been an enormous flop. Or perhaps one of the most legendarily terrible progressive games ever made, Dustborn. They are using your franchises because here's the thing. If you made a game called Laufey, no connection to God of War whatsoever, with an ugly redhead female character, a talking cube and a talking sword, fighting gods in some random absurd setting that nobody's ever heard of, it would sell 50 copies and that would be it. The only reason why God of War Laufey might sell is because it is God of War Laufey, a character already established using another universe and using, crucially, another title. They steal both because they cannot create by themselves, the old Tolkien quote comes to mind, and because they are unable to actually make anything good. And if you can't make anything good, you can't sell, and you can't establish yourself, you must take what others have already established, which also brings about the bonus of taking away your toys. This is another thing that has been well established in various hobby franchises like 40k, for example, or hell, anything that has been touched by progressivism. It is not merely about creating things for themselves, as they never show up or support those things when they are created. Both EX Voto and Dustborn sold a few thousand copies at most. It is about taking away your toys. This is an explicitly malicious and aggressive movement.
Now, I want to be painfully clear. I don't have any problem at all with Faye being a protagonist in God of War, or in a spin-off, or hell, even in a mainline series. I might even like it. I have no idea. I just know that immediately looking at it, it didn't initially look for me. The thing that I take a issue with is the broader trend of this industry, taking existing games, repurposing them, and chasing different audiences, abandoning the original ones. And that's exactly what they're doing. If you're blind to that, I don't know what to tell you. These guys are so very obviously targeting women with this game. I mean, you can see it immediately in just the broader tones at the very beginning. It's the changes in color, it's the cutesy animals, it's the quippy dialogue, it's the humor, it's the fairy tale-like companions that are accompanying her. Like, these guys are very obviously targeting women. They do want to change the audience, and they're going in a different direction. Whether or not that bleeds over to the greater franchise, and this is just a gamble, we'll wait to find out. But keep in mind, one of the things this is what's bothering people. That's where the divide is coming from.
And it will. See, again, we are yet again playing defense here. Will it bleed over? Yes. Yes, it will. It never has not. It has never not. It will. Although, to be fair, with the development time of God of War being in like the half-decade plus region, it might actually hit an era of anti-wokeism before a next entry is produced, conceivably. But the reasons behind this is again why we need to understand why this is happening. None of this is happening because of corporate pressure to earn more money. Nobody believes that a God of War Laufey game will earn more money than a traditional God of War game. It is because the person who wrote it, Alana Pierce, has the correct politics, and no one wants to tell her no. That's why, and it will therefore inevitably bleed into anything else, because this is not motivated by earnings, this is motivated by morality.
Men and women fundamentally just have This brings us to a crossroads. Been listening to Bone Thugs lately. Audience expansion at all costs, ignoring any and all risks in some cases. A lot of games that are just completely terrified of having a target audience, and they're also leaving a lot of their audiences behind by doing this. Every single year, we watch as more and more games come out and they just fail. They fall flat on their face. And a lot of this is just the result of these guys chasing a larger audience. They have gotten greedy. They want more people. And the more that they do it, the more people they leave behind. And eventually, the less people that are going to show up at all.
Now, you're immediately beginning to see the cognitive dissonance here, aren't you? The companies are chasing more people, yet year by year by year by year, they're gaining fewer people and losing more of their own audience. This obviously does not make sense. And any company that this has been going on for a decade plus now, any company that is doing this is obviously able to tell that this is happening. They can say by sales numbers and what titles flop and what titles do not, what the audience want. Let us not ascribe just complete idiocy to these companies. That might have been an explanation for one failed title, or two, or maybe even three, but not for a decade's worth of consistent failures, all due to the same reason. It isn't that they're chasing a broader audience, that they are chasing a progressive audience, and they are chasing it explicitly away from you, the core audience. Not because you are the core audience, but because you are overwhelmingly white, straight men.
One thing I don't think anybody can afford to ignore anymore is how many of these games are failing year after year because they are being made for an audience that is so broad, so diverse, and so poorly defined that they're never actually going to find one. Now, I would love to be proven wrong, but while God of War Laufey probably won't fail, it will undeniably sell fewer copies than God of War Ragnarok because the target audience has changed. Now, the audience is people who already played God of War, plus women tagged onto the side, plus some vague modern audience that nobody can clearly define. And while I have seen plenty of people try to argue the moral good of this because it's making the franchise more inclusive, I do not care to argue the morality of it. I am only interested in the business decision, and I am only aware of it because I was the target audience.
So very, 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 very close to realizing the reason there.
The moment that you try to bolt on a secondary audience onto a product or unnaturally try to broaden its appeal, the entire thing is just going to get thrown into chaos. The tone changes, the marketing changes, the writing changes. The original audience becomes a lot less certain that that game is still for them, like I am with Laufey, while the new audience that these guys are chasing might not even care what these guys are doing. We have watched these kind of shifts damage franchises and collapse studios across the entire industry. We may never see another Dragon Age after Veilguard. Saints Row went from gangsters to quirky nerds and may never return, and I am fully convinced that Fable is going to suffer the exact same fate. These are games that started with defined audiences, which then defined their writing, mechanics, and gameplay. Then somebody came in and decided that that definition was a limitation. So then they changed the tone, they widened their pitch, they contorted these games into something that alienated the people that were already invested without giving anybody else a strong reason to show up. They didn't make a larger audience, they just removed the reason for the audience to exist. All of this is being driven by profitability, or rather profitability conveniently converging with self-destructive empathy. I think a lot of people have kind of concluded that these games, basically all across the entire industry, are being driven by personal politics or some kind of coordinated social agenda, and while I think that that can be true at times, I don't think it's as nearly as organized or intentional as people make it out to be.
Let's pause there for a second. So, profitability? No, absolutely not. Again, these companies know what profitability is. They're not complete idiots. They're not complete idiots. We've got to get over this idea that all of this was simply for profits. No, the argument of the progressives once they first entered into these companies was probably for profit, saying that we can hit a wider audience. We are long past that point. That point was back in the early 2000s, when games were being broadened in terms of difficulties and general ability to play them. We are way past that. This is now driven near solely by politics. And as for the idea that this isn't organized, this is a laughable notion that you would either need to be willfully blind of or simply utterly and completely ignorant of the broader picture. We have now, and this isn't merely in gaming, let's even take this a step further. We now have the point where we've spent years from the US president, ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs. This was in the US government, and it has taken years of presidential actions to even begin to unwind this. Most nations have ministers for women's and equalities now. DEI isn't some fluffy-wuffy nonsensical idea, some broader market orientation, or some unorganized group. It is an established political ideology that is broadly accepted across the establishment of the Western world. This is the cultural norm. We don't need to explain this with some kind of nonsensical conspiracy theory. This is simply the cultural waters in which we have swam now for the last, 40, 50 years, where liberalism has been the only way. And as liberalism eats itself, as due to certain reasons to do with Antonio Gramsci and communism at large, we see more and more extremes interpretations of it. And this then, of course, extends into entertainment, where the people can come into these companies and say, listen, there is an incredibly diverse audience out there. I can speak your language of politics and morality, and therefore convince you that surely everyone else must be sharing that same interpretation of reality. Therefore, if you can tap into that, the true mainstream, you will sell millions of copies. That has not happened. If the companies had genuinely believed that, they would have stopped doing this half a decade or more ago after countless flops. Disney would not have buried itself as deep in the hole as it has before beginning to turn around. And you can also see this within the culture of the companies themselves. This is not a business decision. This is not the actions of some soulless corporate hack somewhere going, well, we are doing this for profit. Yeah. No, this is politics. This is ideology. This is the cultural shift within the companies, and Sony's are hardly the only ones that are doing this by any stretch of the imagination. This is a thing that has infected practically every one of these companies. It is undoubtedly the reason why it's happening, and we can tell this not by the existence of these things themselves, but due to the simple fact that they are the ones championing the changes we are seeing. Why are games becoming more diverse? Is it because there truly is a diverse audience out there? We know that is not the case because the games don't sell. Logically, therefore, there is no diverse audience. Right then, now that we know that, what is the reason why we are aiming at the diverse audience that doesn't exist? It is because that is the politics of the people making it, not the economics, the politics specifically. This is an ideological argument, not an economic one, and we really need to learn that lesson.
Guys, I think the vast majority of game developers are just these creative, beautiful souls who genuinely want nothing more than for everybody to feel welcome playing their games.
If you still do think that, give it another few years, you'll wake up eventually.
And they just want their work to reach as many people as possible. And that just so happens to perfectly align with what executives want, just in the wrong way. Because these executives do want these games to appeal to everybody, but for a much simpler reason. They want this audience to keep growing. But I think what we're looking at is the symptom of a maturing market.
Again, hogwash. Absolute hogwash. It is simply seeing the pattern and then refusing the conclusions that come out of the pattern. If these people are not brilliant, beautiful souls that want as many people to play their games as possible, if that was true, they'd make another God of War Kratos game. As again, the cognitive dissonance here is, I know this won't sell well, and then I think that the people behind it are simply trying to reach as many people as possible. No, you don't. This is merely just a pre-programmed defense in your brain because you know that if you take the next logical step and you go, oh, they hate the core audience, then you'll have to make up some positions there. You'll have to make up some assumptions, and you'll have to be able and willing to condemn the people making the game. The people who are making God of War Laufey are not making it because they want as many people to play it. They are making it explicitly for a smaller market, as has been pointed out repeatedly in this very video. You have to be able to take that next logical step. And as for the corporations, again, hogwash. If corporations wanted simply just to make loads of money, every single company on Earth right now would be making Marvel Rivals. Every single company would be making their version of Marvel Rivals, a Chinese game that came out of absolutely nowhere, with practically zero marketing. Nobody knew what it was, and those who did know what it was simply viewed it as an Overwatch knockoff, which it very much so is, yet it is maintaining 80,000 players peaks consistently. This is how long after its release? I don't even know. This has been going on for quite some time now. So released in December of 2024 to a peak of 644,000 players. Obviously, that falls off over time, but this is clearly a financial success. And why is it? Is it because of the gameplay? God, no. It literally is just an Overwatch ripoff. Is it because it does something particularly magical? Is it because it's Marvel? God, no. Marvel is flopping in the entertainment, both in comics and the video games and the movies at large. The reason why is because the Chinese aren't burdened with our politics. That is why Marvel Rivals is successful. Hot characters, both male and female, mind you, because if you truly want to attract a broad audience, what you do is you put Magicka in there and you also put Black Panther in there. You make both attractive, both powerful, both interesting. You do not appeal to the broadest audience by making an ugly woman in a Quirk-Chungus setting. You appeal to the broadest possible audience by making an awesome, beautiful woman in a serious setting. If this was truly just corporate greed, we'd know about it. It isn't, and we need to recognize that fact.
I think that the games industry is largely done growing, or at the very least, that growth is going to slow dramatically. There are just only so many people in the world, only so much free time, only so much disposable income, and you're only going to be able to make this hobby accessible so much before you're going to reach a point of saturation. And I think that gaming is pretty damn saturated.
Now, there is an element of this as well, at least in certain regard, because gaming is not saturated, not fully. We know this due to the explosive explosive success of certain title, like Schedule 1, for example. There is absolutely loads of room still in gaming for interesting and unique ideas that speak to, and this is the key part, a specific audience, a target demographic. They can still be enormously successful. And as for the growth, again, if all they wanted was growth, they'd simply be making Marvel rivals. Although there are elements, of course, of saturations within certain spheres. For example, the reason why there was never a World of Warcraft killer was largely because World of Warcraft already owned damn near the entire market, and the only way for an MMO to exist alongside World of Warcraft was to carve out its own niche, like EVE Online, for example. The same thing with, take for example, live service games, which, sure, there is an audience for free-to-play live service game, and there are several established ones, but there is only so many. Same with streaming. We have now seen saturation in things like Netflix and Disney Plus, etc., but there is absolutely still room for growth, just you need to aim the growth at the people who are actually there, rather than the people you wished were there.
Now, at the same time, we have games that are taking longer to make, costing more to produce, and the hobby itself becoming more expensive to enter, things that really should not be happening at the exact same time. More people are being forced out of the hobby financially, while these companies are also expecting to still grow year after year. So now we have these executives that are just scrambling, trying to deny the reality that's right in front of them. They don't want to shrink their companies, they don't want to lower their projections, they don't want to tell their shareholders that the market has finally reached its limit. So instead, these guys are trying to broaden their audience. They're trying.
And again, it's not shareholders. It's not these executives. Stop thinking it's some shadowy boss. That is no different from the idea that there's a conspiracy theory going around about DEI. That's not how this works. The boss simply wants to earn money, and he has been told over the years to allow more and more of the creativity to happen in the hands of the game's developers, which is why it is happening. Again, if it was just the executives, everybody would be making Marvel rivals right about now, or simply trying to copy one of the other hit indie games, for example. No, this is the creatives. The reason why they decided in God of War Laufey to hire like that random dude from The Boys to play a cube and put him in a fucking mocap suit is not because an executive wants to earn money, it's because some spoiled artistic brat at the company who have, through reasons of blood magic one can only assume, or blatant retardation, been put in charge of the project.
Trying to reshape existing franchises and existing studios to.
That's also where the bloat of the costs come, by the way. As, again, if the executives had their way, Creative Assembly wouldn't have 700 employees. They'd have like 200, tops. And even that would probably be bloat.
Fit more people, assuming that the original audience is still going to remain loyal no matter what these guys do. And then they go and they chase this audience that may never actually be interested in their games at all. The place we've seen this happen the most clearly has been with live service games, To Kill the Justice League, Concord, High Guard, Marathon, and probably a dozen other games that nobody has even heard of. And I know this.
And a lot of those failures, again, also was explicitly due to politics, although I do agree live service games are rather oversaturated.
Didn't stop at a business level. It spread to the studios themselves until these companies seemingly could not recognize the audiences that were sitting directly in front of them. That is exactly how you see a company that is abandoning the Destiny brand to go all in on Marathon, a game that just went free for this last weekend and was only able to peak at around 40,000 players. Sony spent years denying the reality of their own audience, and the results ended up showing up in their own sales numbers. In 2019, they had reached their peak of 58 million units sold. By 2024, that number had fallen to more than half, 28 million, before recovering slightly to 32 million in 2025. And what changed? Sony started giving their audience what they actually expected from PlayStation again. Astrobot, Ghost of Yotai, Death Stranding 2, high-quality single-player games with clear identities and an obvious audience. It was only when Sony finally returned back to the players that it had spent years overlooking that their numbers finally started moving back in the right direction. And I think that says everything. Sony did not need to discover some new massive audience hidden somewhere beyond the edge of the market. It already had one. They already had their own. The problem was that it became so consumed with finding the next audience that they stopped serving the people who were already there.
And that then is the final point here. Again, it's not because of the economics of it. It simply is not. It is politics, it is DI agenda, it is the culture war that is causing this to happen. But as companies, like Sony in this case, rediscover their audience, and this, by the way, is not necessarily even overtly political thing with Sony, it was a preference thing. Simply the fact that people want certain games. They want certain games with certain characters for certain demographics, for certain styles of gameplay, be it single player or multiplayer in some cases as well, like Destiny, for example. That is what the company should be providing. Instead of attempting to create new audiences specifically for cultural reasons that do not exist and have been proven to exist. If the companies wish to in fact recover from this, all they need to do is go back to that audience, though in certain cases I do believe it might simply be too late. At this point, as we saw with the recent Superman movie, for example, even if you give the audience 92% of what they want, or as we in fact saw with He-Man as well, so long as that remaining 8% of irreverence, of not caring, of still forcing in a little bit of culture here and there exists, the audience will reject you. There are some brands, like DC definitely, that have burned their audience so many times, so deeply, so repeatedly, and so maliciously that the only way they can possibly recover is through a years and years long campaign to regain the goodwill that they lost. The only way for DC to have a chance to re-establish their movie franchise at this point is with 5+ years of solid movies that are all aimed directly at the core audience, and the first of them is going to be ignored. The second is probably going to be ignored too. Only by the time word of mouth has reached sufficient numbers of people to actually begin rallying the extremely dubious fans will a recovery be possible. And at this point, I don't even know if the economics are there anymore to carry out that recovery, as many of these companies have buried themselves so deep in the red that I'm not sure if they have the treasure chest to maintain production for the necessary decade or so that it will take to regain the trust they burned so happily upon the bonfire of progressive culture. In gaming in particular, as a lot of these smaller companies, they don't have the money of Disney or DC or Paramount, etc. And indeed, even one of those companies are starting to look decidedly unhealthy as well. Now, for a company like Sony that is beginning to pivot and has a broad enough catalogue to pivot to, there is still the possibility for a recovery. And I do indeed believe that many of these companies will at least in part do so. But over the course of the next decade, we are going to see a thinning of the lines of the massive corporations, or so at least I believe. But this, then, I hope, has been an interesting little peek into the minds of the normie populace. As I reiterate it again here, the normies have basically arrived at roughly the position of 2019-2020, where they can now very clearly see the problems, they can see the patterns, and they do know why this is happening, but they are not willing to make the leap from seeing the pattern to attributing blame just yet. And in part that is probably because there are safety concerns to take into considerations. The progressives still hold a great deal of the reins of power, particularly on platforms. If you come out as obviously anti-progressives, you will receive a lot of backlash on social media, and there is every possibility that your channel will be flagged to fuck and back. I should know that at this point. But I do hope that people's sense of morals will eventually, and their actual genuine, I hope, love for the franchises and video games that they grew up with will eventually triumph over that fear of consequences of doing what is right. And again, seeing as they've arrived in 2020, give them another 2 or 3 years, and we might see some very interesting responses. Until next time, I've been Arch, thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.